I was standing in the baking aisle of Ralph's on Thanksgiving morning, holding a chocolate cake I had bought for my son's family. I had imagined walking into their house that afternoon, placing the cake on the table, and watching everyone laugh together. Instead, I was standing under fluorescent lights, wondering why my own son had made me feel like a stranger. I called Ethan. "Should I bring pumpkin pie or apple pie too?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then my son finally answered. "Dad, we already had Thanksgiving dinner last night." I thought I had misheard him. Last night? Before I could ask another question, his wife Lauren took the phone. "Honestly, Walter," she said coldly, "everything was just easier without you there." I stood completely still. For a few seconds, I couldn't find anything to say. "All right," I finally whispered. Then I ended the call. My name is Walter Callum. I was 68 years old, and I had spent nearly 4 decades working as a licensed electrician in Pasadena. For the last 4 years, I had also been saving money for one particular purpose. I wanted to give my son a home, not a loan, not something he would have to repay, a genuine gift. I had saved $480,000 and purchased a 3-bedroom house on Willowbrook Lane just 6 weeks earlier. The covered porch reminded me of my late wife, Margaret. She had always loved houses with porches where families could sit together in the evening. The paperwork was sitting on my kitchen table. I had planned to give Ethan the documents that Thanksgiving afternoon. But there would be no Thanksgiving dinner for me. I sat in my truck outside the store, staring at the cake on the passenger seat. Then something inside me changed. Instead of driving home, I headed north. A few minutes later, I noticed a hand-painted sign outside a community building. Community Harvest Center, Thanksgiving Meal. Everyone welcome. I walked inside. I handed the cake to the volunteers. And that's where I met Noah. He was 8 years old, wearing worn-out sneakers with a hole near one of the toes. He stood beside his grandmother, watching the cake without reaching for it. Finally, he asked me something that I would remember for the rest of my life. Is that really for everybody? Not, can I have some? He wanted to know whether kindness could exist without someone expecting something in return. Yes, I told him. It's for everyone. His grandmother, Diana, introduced herself. She was a retired pediatric nurse who had spent decades caring for children. We talked briefly. Before leaving, I asked Noah one question. If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be? He answered immediately. I want Grandma to stop worrying. That sentence stayed with me. I gave Diana the name of a housing nonprofit and a caseworker who might be able to help. Then I made another call. This time, it was to my attorney, Dennis. Stop the Willowbrook transfer, I told him. Immediately. The house had never legally become Ethan's because I hadn't completed the final recording process. The gift could still be stopped. At 2:14 that afternoon, Ethan called. What did you do? He shouted. I stopped the transfer. But we've already been planning everything around that house. Planning around a house that wasn't yours? He went silent. Then he said, We trusted you. I remembered Lauren's words from that morning. Everything was easier without me. So I answered quietly, You told me you were better off without me. Now you're asking me to prove that I still care? That evening, my neighbor Ray arrived with a casserole. But he wasn't there just to bring food. He had something much more disturbing to tell me. Ethan had been asking people around the neighborhood whether I seemed confused lately, whether I repeated myself, whether I was still capable of handling my finances. Ray looked directly at me. Walter, he said, I don't think your son was just trying to keep you away from Thanksgiving." Then he lowered his voice. "I think he's been preparing for something much bigger." And that was the moment I realized the Thanksgiving phone call wasn't the beginning of my family's betrayal. It was only the moment I finally discovered it. Because if Ethan had been secretly building a case against his own father, I needed to know exactly what he was planning and who else had been helping him. Ray's warning kept me awake that night. I couldn't understand why Ethan would ask people questions about my memory and finances. Then Ray told me something that made everything worse. "There's something else," he said. "It's about Marcus." Marcus was my younger brother. For years, I believed Marcus wanted nothing to do with me. According to Ethan, my brother had been jealous of the life I built and had stopped caring about our family. I had believed that story, especially after Margaret died. Those were difficult years, and I trusted my son more than I trusted my own doubts. But Ray told me Marcus had actually been trying to find me. Someone had contacted him using my phone number and told him I wanted nothing to do with him. I immediately called Marcus. When he answered, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he told me the truth. Ethan had contacted him after Margaret's death and pretended to be speaking for me. He told Marcus that I needed distance, that Marcus was causing problems, that I didn't want contact. Marcus had written me letters. I never received them. They had apparently arrived during the period when Ethan had access to my home, and I was barely checking my mail. Then Marcus revealed something even more disturbing. Months earlier, Ethan had contacted him again. This time, he wasn't angry. He was concerned. He asked Marcus whether I seemed mentally sharp, whether I was making strange decisions, whether I was capable of managing money. He even mentioned cognitive decline. I sat there in silence. My son wasn't simply excluding me from Thanksgiving. He had been creating a story about me, a story that could eventually make other people believe I was incapable of controlling my own property. That night, I opened Ethan's Instagram. There were photographs from the Thanksgiving dinner I hadn't been invited to. 11 people sat around a beautifully decorated table. In the center was a wooden bowl I had made decades earlier. Another photograph showed Ethan and Lauren smiling. Behind them was a brochure for the Willowbrook property. The caption said, "So much to look forward to in the year ahead." There was no mention of me. The next morning, I went to Ethan's house to retrieve a toolbox I'd loaned him. Inside the hallway, I noticed something immediately. A photograph of Ethan and me from his college graduation was gone. In its place was a photograph of Lauren's family. Lauren noticed me looking. "It needed updating," she said. That sentence told me more than she realized. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being erased. Later that week, one of Ethan's co-workers contacted me. She had attended the dinner. She told me Ethan had raised a glass and celebrated the Willowbrook house as something he and Lauren had achieved together. Not something his father had purchased. Not something I had sacrificed for. Something they had supposedly earned. That weekend, Marcus and his wife Renee came to my house. While we were sitting at the kitchen table, Ethan and Lauren arrived carrying groceries and a wrapped picture frame. It looked like an apology. But the timing was suspicious. I asked Ethan one question. "When did you find out the house transfer was canceled?" He hesitated. "Yesterday afternoon." "And when did you decide to come here?" Silence. That told me everything. I finally explained what I had done for him over the years. College expenses, car repairs, loans, bills, free electrical work, emergency payments, even helping with his dog whenever he needed someone. Then Ethan said something that shocked me. "You always use those things to control me." I looked at him. A gift isn't control, I said. But if you keep reaching for the giver every time you need something, eventually the giver has to let go. He lowered his head. I didn't hug him. I didn't chase him. I let the silence remain. After they left, I called Dennis. But this time, I wasn't calling to protect myself from Ethan. I was calling because I had decided the house needed a different purpose. I wanted to help someone who genuinely needed it. And I had no idea that decision would eventually change Noah's life forever. The house Ethan believed he was about to inherit was about to become something completely different. And the family who would receive it had no idea that Walter was about to change their future. I asked my attorney what it would take to place the Willowbrook property into a long-term housing arrangement. He connected me with Sandra, who worked with a nonprofit that provided temporary homes for families facing difficult circumstances. The arrangement was simple. The organization would select a family through its normal process. They would receive a safe place to live for several months while working toward permanent stability. I would keep ownership of the property. No rent, no strings attached. But before I agreed, I asked Sandra a difficult question. What if I'm doing this because I'm angry at my son? She didn't pretend the question was easy. That possibility exists, she said. But ask yourself whether you'll still believe it's the right decision after the anger disappears. I thought about it. The answer was yes. This wasn't about punishing Ethan. It was about finally putting the house where my money could do something meaningful. So I went to Willowbrook myself. After 39 years as an electrician, I couldn't hand over a house without making sure it was safe. I checked every circuit. I inspected the electrical panel. I discovered that the existing service wasn't adequate for a modern household. So I upgraded it. Ray helped me. The work took time, but when I finally finished, I stood on the porch and looked around. For months, I had imagined Ethan living there. Now I imagined a family who had never had a safe place of their own. Meanwhile, Ethan faced another reality. I had co-signed a credit arrangement for him years earlier. The monthly payment was more than $4,000. I removed my financial authorization. When Ethan called in a panic, I didn't yell. I simply told him, "You need to handle this yourself now." He didn't like hearing it, but I knew something important. Helping someone isn't the same as carrying them forever. A few weeks later, Ethan and I met for coffee. For the first time, he spoke honestly. He admitted that he had become so accustomed to my help that he stopped seeing it as sacrifice. He assumed it would always be there. Then he asked me a question. "Can we fix this?" I told him I'd forgiven him. But forgiveness didn't mean everything could immediately return to the way it was. "If we rebuild," I said, "it has to be different. No more relationship based on money. No more showing up only when something was needed. No more pretending that support was an obligation." He nodded. Months passed. Then Sandra called. The nonprofit had completed its selection process. Diana and Noah had been chosen. Not because I had requested them, not because I had influenced the decision, they qualified on their own. When Sandra told me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The move-in date was set for the first Saturday in February. I didn't go. I didn't want applause. I didn't want Diana to feel indebted. I stayed at Ray's house instead. Later that morning, Sandra sent me a message. "Family's in. Everything went smoothly." I smiled. Ray and I had hung a string of lights in one of the trees outside the house. Noah didn't know who had put them there. He simply saw them. And sometimes that's enough. A year later, Thanksgiving came around again. This time, dinner was at Ray's house. There were 8 places at the table. Nobody was being excluded. Marcus and Renee brought food. Sandra brought a casserole. Diana brought a pie. I brought another chocolate cake from the same bakery. When Noah saw it, he smiled. But this time, he didn't ask whether it was really for everyone. He already knew. After dinner, Noah walked over and handed me a folded piece of paper. In large, careful letters, he had written, "Thank you for believing I deserved a future." I couldn't speak for a moment. A year earlier, I had stood in a grocery store holding a cake for a family that had decided life was easier without me. Now I was sitting at a table where people wanted me there. Not because I owned a house, not because I paid their bills, not because they needed something from me, simply because they cared. That experience taught me something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Love should be generous, but love also needs boundaries. If you keep giving without limits, people can eventually stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. I had spent decades building a life for my family. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't giving. It was finally learning when to stop. And when I stopped, I discovered something unexpected. I didn't lose everything. I finally found what was real. And somewhere across town, under a string of lights outside a house that had once been meant for my son, an 8-year-old boy was falling asleep in a room where he no longer had to wonder whether tomorrow would be safe. That was worth more than any house I could have given away. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't another rescue. Sometimes it's the courage to step back, set a boundary, and let your kindness reach the person who truly needs it.